I wish you would die. Those 4 words fell like stones to my chest, shattering something I thought was indestructible, a mother's love for her own daughter. I still feel the icy echo of her voice, as if she'd spat venom without even blinking. The silence afterward was worse than the scream, a silence that made me hear the crack of trust breaking. For years, I held this girl in my arms, washed her wounds, and gave her my last piece of bread so she wouldn't go hungry. Now, she looks at me as if she sees an obstacle, not a mother. I know she wanted more than my words. She wanted my absence. My death would be, for her, an inheritance in advance, a passport to a life she believes she deserves. It's strange how cruelty can be born within one's own home. The walls that once held laughter now seem complicit in a silent judgment against me. Every detail in the room seems to whisper the same thing. You are no longer needed. A mother transformed into a shadow that, for them, only gets in the way. And it was in this abyss that something inside me awakened. It wasn't just pain, it was also lucidity. Like a candle suddenly illuminating a dark room, I realized there was more at stake than my feelings. My entire life was being reduced to a contract, to figures on a piece of paper, to a loan that supported the same family that now wanted to bury me in silence. Can love survive a death sentence handed down by its own daughter? Or must love die for dignity to be reborn? In that moment, I understood that her words weren't just cruel. They were a warning, a sign that the story wasn't over yet, and that I would have the chance to write the ending with my own hands. When I heard those words, it wasn't just my heart that broke. It was as if the entire ground had opened up beneath me. I felt a cold emptiness fill my chest, as if the air had become too heavy to breathe. In that instant, I understood that it wasn't just a phrase spoken in the heat of the moment. It was the reflection of something deeper, something she'd been harboring, perhaps even silently nurturing. Her gaze, steady and almost indifferent, said more than any insult could. There was no anger, only calculation. And as I sat across from her, I began to see every detail more clearly. Her manicured nails tapping on the table, as if impatient for results. Her cell phone within reach, flashing messages that probably weren't about me, but about the future she planned with what I represented. Assets, money, security. Suddenly, I was no longer a mother. I was a bureaucratic obstacle that needed to be removed. This realization stung more than any physical wound could. It's hard to say, but I believe many people have felt something similar. The moment when someone you love begins to treat you like a burden, like a nuisance. It's as if suddenly your presence is no longer an affection, but a debt. And it's precisely because this pain is so common, so silent, that so many people choose to stay here, following each revelation, because they know that somehow this story is theirs too. As she spoke, my gaze drifted to the window. The street continued on. Children running, neighbors chatting with grocery bags in their hands, a dog barking incessantly. Everything seemed normal outside, but inside me something was breaking completely. How is it possible for life to remain so indifferent while everything inside us is falling apart? And yet, in this contrast between the ordinary world and my inner ruin, something began to form. Spark. A reminder that even the cruelest words can become fuel. I didn't yet know how, but I sensed that phrase, "I wish you were dead," wouldn't be the final point. Perhaps it was just the first line of a chapter she never imagined I'd have the courage to write. I stood there, still, trying to swallow the heavy silence that spread through the room. Her words still echoed, sharp, as if etched into the walls. But what hurt me most wasn't just the direct cruelty. It was what lay hidden beneath, what wasn't said. That death wish carried within it a rush, an almost practical urgency. It wasn't about feelings, it was about gain. And it was this realization that transformed the pain into something even denser, almost unbearable. Suddenly, I began to notice signs that had previously seemed trivial. Conversations interrupted when I entered the room. Glances exchanged between her and her husband, the discreet grip on his arm as if giving a silent order. Small pieces of a puzzle that, together, formed a dark picture. My life was being calculated like a number on a bill. I was no longer seen as a person, but as a value. That day, the clock seemed to tick slower. Each tick sounded like a sentence. The light coming through the window illuminated only half of her face, leaving the other half in shadow. And for a moment, this image seemed like a perfect metaphor. The daughter I knew and the stranger who was revealed. The memory of her as a child, her eyes shining with trust, contrasted with the cold, distant gaze of the woman before me. The contrast tore me apart. And as my heart sank, I also realized something else. There were consequences beyond my own pain. If I gave in, if I silently accepted, I would be teaching her, and everyone around me, that cruelty pays off, that dehumanization can be the path to achieving what one desires. It was like letting a shadow spread even further, swallowing any shred of light. It was at this point that fear mixed with a spark of resilience. Because even as I bled inside, I began to sense something bigger was at stake. It wasn't just my dignity. It was the fine line between continuing to be treated as invisible and proving, once and for all, that my existence carried a weight that could not be erased. And maybe, just maybe, that confrontation was only the beginning of a revelation far more devastating than they could bear. The silence that followed seemed to have a life of its own, pulsing through the walls, the furniture, even the air I breathed. It was as if every corner of the house had stored those cruel words and now echoed them, reminding me that there was no going back. But amidst the suffocating pain, something unexpected emerged. A memory. I saw, as if in a flash, my mother's face, now aged, quietly telling me never to allow myself to be treated as invisible. I remembered the firm way she held my hands, how her eyes, even tired, held an ancient strength. This memory became a spark of warmth amidst the ice that surrounded me. And it was in this contrast, between the present cruelty and the memory of past love, that I realized the pain wasn't just mine. It was part of a larger story, a chain of women who, generation after generation, had to fight to prove their worth. I couldn't simply allow my daughter to reduce me to a number on a contract, because it wouldn't just be me she would diminish. It would be an entire legacy of dignity. Sometimes I think that anyone who witnesses a moment like this may have felt something similar. That moment when someone you love's cruelty cuts too deeply, and you feel like giving up. It's at this point that many feel the urge to support this journey, leaving a silent signal that the message has touched them. It's almost like extending an invisible hand saying, "I felt this pain too." The evening light began to filter through the window, golden and delicate, contrasting with the darkness that surrounded me inside. It was as if the world outside insisted on reminding me that life still had beauty, even when mine seemed to have been stained by the coldness of the one I loved most. This contrast gave me a breather, a brief respite before the weight crushed me again. And yet, amid this brief reprieve, the question lingered. How far would they go to turn my demise into profit? I knew the answer would come, and perhaps it would be even darker than I was prepared to bear. With each passing day, I became more aware of the chasm that had opened between us. Small gestures became glaring signals. The way she averted her eyes when I spoke, as if my words didn't deserve space. The impatient way she drummed her fingers on the table, as if telling my own story were a waste of time. Even the silences carried contempt, and it was in this emptiness that I felt the deepest loneliness. Being surrounded by people, yet invisible, like an old portrait forgotten on the wall. There were nights when I would wake in the dark and stare at the ceiling, hearing only the sound of my own breathing. At these times, fear visited me like a thick shadow, reminding me that perhaps my own daughter was laying the groundwork to erase me forever. But along with the fear came another presence, more subtle and persistent, the memory of everything I'd already survived. I recalled the suspicious looks when I first entered a job not meant for me, the veiled whispers that questioned my true potential. Each microaggression carried a weight that, combined, taught me to walk silently but firmly. This contrast became increasingly evident within me. The fear of being discarded by my own daughter and the hope that my story wouldn't end this way. It was like walking a tightrope, with emptiness on one side and the light of a new dawn on the other. And the more I balanced on this fine line, the more I realized that each step was a choice, to give up on myself or to reinvent myself from the pain. In those moments of silent vigil, I felt my heart pounding, as if anticipating something yet to come. A sign that life, however cruel, would yet have a revelation in store for me. I didn't know when or how, but I was certain that the hidden pieces of this wicked game were about to move, and when they did, nothing would ever be the same again. In the mornings that followed, I surveyed the house like someone examining a stage after a show. Every detail seemed to carry a hidden meaning. The forgotten cup in the sink, the sofa with the deep mark of her body, the soft scent of her perfume still lingering in the hallway. Everything reminded me that I shared a space with someone who no longer saw me as a mother, but as an obstacle. It was like walking through a stage lit from the outside but hiding deep shadows within. There were times when I would let myself be carried away by memories of lighter times. I would see the little girl running around the yard, her easy laugh, her hair flowing in the wind. This memory brought me warmth, but also a sharp pain, because the contrast between that image and the cold woman before me was too great to bear. It was like looking at the same face in two different photographs, one bathed in the sunshine of childhood, the other swallowed by the shadows of ambition. This duality accompanied my every thought. On one side, the hope that there was still something to save, a remnant of affection buried somewhere deep in her heart. On the other, the fear that what remained was only emptiness, a hole of no return where greed takes hold and flourishes. I teetered between these two shores like a boat caught in opposing currents, unsure of where I would be carried. At night, when the silence became almost absolute, I would hear the smallest sounds in the house. The creaking of the floorboards, the distant slamming of a gate, the wind blowing through the cracks in the window. Each sound seemed to amplify the loneliness that surrounded me. It was in this silence that my mind projected the unanswered questions. How far would it go? How far could I endure? And it was in this state of vigilance and uncertainty that I realized something was about to reveal itself. Like thunder before a storm, I felt in the air the promise that the truth would come, inevitable, laden with light and shadow at once. As the days passed, I realized that nothing in the house was casual. The interrupted conversations, the papers left on the table, even the glances exchanged between her and her husband, all carried a hidden weight. It was as if every gesture were part of a calculated choreography, a silent rehearsal for an outcome I didn't yet know. And, in this scenario, I began to understand that my silence was no longer just pain, it was also strategy. Because while they believed I wasn't noticing anything, I learned to observe every movement, like someone watching a chess piece, waiting for the final move. This realization began to change the way I saw the future. If before I'd felt cornered, now I began to glimpse small openings. Her words, so cruel, became a constant reminder that I needed to prepare. It was like walking down a dark hallway, but where a distant, still dim light glimmered in the distance. This image nourished me, made me resist, made me believe that the end of that story wouldn't be written by them. And the curious thing is that, when I share this memory with myself, I can almost hear the echo of so many other voices who have experienced similar situations. The weight of being diminished, discarded, treated as a number and not as a person. It is at this point that I invite you to reflect too. What do you feel when you hear this story? Many choose to put this reflection into words, leaving a comment that is not only a response, but also a reflection of their own pain and strength. As I continued to watch, the contrasts became clearer. The effort I made to hold firm against the ease with which they allowed themselves to be consumed by ambition. On one side, the patient waiting. On the other, the rush to reap fruits that had not yet been planted. This uneven game revealed to me a simple truth. The fastest runner doesn't always finish first. And as this tension built, I felt something larger approaching, as if all the pieces were slowly aligning, about to form a figure that had remained invisible until then, but would soon reveal itself in all its force. It was strange how, the more I observed, the more clarity emerged. Small details that had previously seemed insignificant began to form a larger picture. The way she quickly gathered documents when I approached, the hurried whisper into her phone before turning off the screen, even the way he avoided looking at me when he came home from work. It all created an atmosphere of constant conspiracy, as if I were an unwelcome presence in my own home. And yet, behind this suffocating scenario, there was a paradox that sustained me. On one hand, the almost physical pain of realizing how much my own daughter wished for my disappearance. On the other, the unexpected strength of understanding that this desire could not define me. It was like walking down a road where at every turn a new shadow appeared, yet at the same time, the sky insisted on opening cracks of light. The nights were the worst. Silence fell heavily, and I found myself staring into the darkness as if staring into a mirror. There, alone, every memory came back vividly. The child who once ran into my arms asking for protection, and the woman who now, with an icy gaze, wanted to push me into oblivion. This contrast tore me apart, but it also reminded me that there was something inside me that couldn't be erased so easily. I began to realize that the tension wasn't just internal. It was evident on their faces too. There was nervousness in their gestures, a rush in their speech, a barely concealed anxiety that betrayed more than words could explain. This uneasiness made me realize that perhaps they weren't as strong as they seemed. Perhaps the fear wasn't just mine. This silent discovery brought me a strange sense of balance. As if, finally, I had found a position on the board that allowed me to breathe without being crushed. But at the same time, the knowledge that this game was far from over kept me alert. Because I knew, the closer I got to the truth, the darker the secrets that would come to light. With each movement, I felt the ground beneath my feet grow more unstable. It was like walking on a glass floor, transparent enough to reveal the chasms, yet firm enough to compel me to keep walking. The game they were playing seemed calculated, but it revealed fissures, restless glances, words cut off in mid-sentence, lapses of impatience that revealed more than they intended to conceal. And I silently pieced together each fragment, like someone assembling a mosaic of hidden intentions. The most unsettling thing was how the house transformed into a stage. Sometimes, walking down the hallway, I felt like I was walking into a play where everyone had rehearsed lines except me. They whispered in corners, their phones vibrated at unlikely times, and even quick visits carried an uncomfortable rush. It was as if a curtain were about to part, revealing something I couldn't yet fully see. In those moments, the contrast pierced me like a blade. On one side, the shadow of betrayal, thick and suffocating, like a heavy cloud heralding a storm. On the other, the memory of my own resistance, a small but persistent flame that refused to go out. This oscillation kept me alert, as if each moment were simultaneously a risk and a possibility. I sometimes saw myself reflected in the house's mirrors, not the fragile woman they wanted me to be, but a face marked by stories that had survived so many other storms. The mirror gave me a silent certainty. There was more strength there than they had imagined. But with this image came a doubt. How long could I sustain this silence without tearing myself apart? It was like living in two overlapping realities. The apparent normalcy of everyday life, with its routine of coffee, washed dishes, and measured steps, and the subterranean tension that grew with each passing second, invisible but impossible to ignore. And at that point, I realized something was already moving toward the inevitable. The air seemed thicker, as if the truth were approaching with slow but steady steps, ready to reveal itself when least expected. It was then that I realized, all that darkness surrounding me wasn't just a trap, it was also a revelation. Because by forcing me to face the silence, it showed me the strength I had forgotten. Every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every attempt to reduce me to nothing, all of it became a stepping stone, an impulse for me to see beyond the pain. It was like walking through a narrow corridor and suddenly reaching a wide, bright space, where the air finally became breathable. The image of my daughter, torn between the innocence of childhood and the coldness of adulthood, still wounded me. But now this wound wasn't just pain. It was also a reminder of how much I'd survived, how much I'd resisted, even when the whole world seemed determined to silence me. There was a strange beauty in this contrast. While they believed they were winning, it was I who, silently, gathered proof, strength, and courage. And perhaps that's why sharing this journey feels so special. Because I know that many of those who follow me have, at some point, felt the same loneliness, the same doubt, the same feeling of being treated as a burden. When you choose to like, comment, or subscribe, it's not just about this story. It's like saying, I recognize this pain. I too have found my strength. It's a small gesture, but it carries the grandeur of an invisible link, connecting different stories through the thread of resistance. Today, when I look back, I see that the greatest transformation was not just in the outcome that was yet to come, but in the path that led me there. Because it was in this process of watching, waiting, and enduring that I discovered a powerful truth. Kindness is not weakness, patience is not submission, silence is not surrender. And it is with this certainty that I conclude this section, leaving in the air not a closed answer, but a feeling that all of us at some point can transform pain into strength, shadow into light, loss into achievement. And realizing this, it becomes impossible not to feel that being here, now witnessing every detail, is a privilege that brings us closer and makes us stronger.